today. It is Thursday, October 13th, 9:45 Eastern Standard Time, and we have a great live schedule for you guys. This is just added value for my current clients, whether you are taking my 10-week course, Algebra Made Simple, and our elementary level course, Math Made Simple. You could be in our financial course, Money Made Simple, or you could just be working with me on a one-on-one basis, dealing with tutoring or things like that. Either way, this is some added value for you guys throughout the week. Perhaps your child has maybe had an hour-long teaching session learning a new standard or some specific subject that we were covering that week, and it's been a couple of days, and they're starting to forget what we talked about, and they're like, I remember, this is that light touch, hopefully, that will remind you of what we discussed in class and maybe give you a little more clarity. And perhaps I can touch on some things that I didn't have time to cover in that 1 hour. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get into it. I have several topics that I want to brush up on for our learners, and just hopefully this is helpful for anyone who's basically kind of struggling through homeschool courses, or you're a parent and maybe this is a bit above your head at this point. You don't really remember it because you haven't had algebra in 30 years. It's for people like in those situations for sure. But anyway, I want to go ahead and get into the first topic. So obviously, if you're in like Algebra 1 or Algebra 2, if not at the high school level, I would even say if you're pre-algebra level, you're going to be looking at how to factor a polynomial. That's a big component that takes some time because there's different ways to do it depending on the type of polynomial you have. The very first type that you will always be asked to do, or usually are introduced with, is called factoring by the greatest common factor. A lot of times your teacher will say factor by GCF. So I want to review that, and then I'm going to show you what to do when you have multiple types that are hitting you at the same time. So if you ever see GCF, that stands for the greatest. I'm going to type it in here so you guys have a little note of it. Common factor. And, that's a method that's used to break down a polynomial into smaller components. Really, what factors are they're smaller components that if I multiplied them together, I get the original thing I had to begin with. For example, 10 can be broken up into factors because 10, the factors would be, for example, 1 times 10 or maybe 2 times 5, right? They're smaller numbers that if I multiplied them back together, 2 times 5, I'm going to get what I had in the first place, 10, right? The factors of 20 they're multifaceted, but you could say 4 and 5, right? If I multiply 4 and 5 together, I'm going to get 20 again. So when it comes to polynomials, it's the same idea. It's just when you have multiple terms joined together by either addition or subtraction. So for example, I want to show you a linear binomial, and that means it has 2 terms and that there's a degree of 1. So for example, let's say I had the polynomial 5x plus 45, okay? This is considered a polynomial, and it's considered a linear polynomial because even though you don't see it, there's a degree of 1 above that variable. Mathematicians by heart are either lazy or efficient. Depends on how you look at it, right? Guys sometimes say, oh, no, we're efficient. And then the ladies a lot of times are like, you're just being lazy, right? But this is kind of what it's like. So if you have x by itself, that's really to the first power, meaning it's a linear a function or a linear polynomial. And if you're asked to factor this, I always tell kids, I got 1 string on my guitar. You need to first see if it has a GCF. It doesn't always have a GCF, but it's your job to diagnose and find out. It's kind of like a doctor sees someone unconscious laying on the ground. Their protocol is is there a pulse? Are they breathing? You got to find that out first so you know what course of action to do. Do I call the morgue or do I actually call the ambulance? So if you look at this, you ask yourself, does it have a GCF? Hopefully you figure out between 5x and 45, it does. They both have a 5 in common. In other words, 5 has several factors, right? The factors of 5 actually doesn't have several, just has a couple. It's 5 times 1, right? Those are the only factors of 5. But if you took the number 45, there's lots of different factors. You got 1, you got 45, you got 5, you got 9, you probably got 15. I'm running out of room here. 3. You got all these different numbers in common, but 5 is the biggest one that they both have in common, right? So we call that a greatest common factor. So I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, 5 is my GCF. And then in parentheses, this is the part you got to think about. You want to take your current polynomial and divide it by the GCF. So you start with the first term, 5x divided by 5. Well, 5 divided by 5 is 1, and you're still left with that 1x left over. So you can either say 1x. I got one client who really likes the 1, doesn't like it when I don't put the 1 there. So shout out to you. I'm putting the 1 in there for you, okay? 1x, 5 divided by 5 is 1, and there's an x left over. But honestly, if you're taking a multiple choice test, if it's 1x, they usually just leave it as x. It's like kind of like saying I got one marker in my hand. Or I could just say I got a marker in my hand. I'm saying the same thing, but most people just say I got a marker. I got an x. Okay, you don't have to say 1x, but you can. You can. Okay, so once I do that, now I'm moving on to the second term. I got 45. I got to divide that by the GCF of 5. 45 divided by 5 is 9, and it's a positive 9, so I'm going to say plus 9. And guess what? I am done. I'm done. All right. I have factored this linear binomial into 5 times x plus 9. If I were to actually multiply these back times each other, I'm going to get 5x plus 45 when I'm done. That's how I know I factored it. You can always check factoring by multiplying your factors and seeing if you go back to what you had. I'll say it again. You can always check your factors by multiplying them back together and seeing if you had what you originally had. For example, 5 parentheses x plus 9, that's the distributive property, right? If you're going to multiply that back out, this is my way of checking it. 5 times x is 5x, and 5 times 9 is 45. So you can see, oh, it checks out. If I multiply my factors back out, I'm going to get what I had originally. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's a little recap for those of y'all going through some material. I got one student who's kind of doing 2 methods at the same time. There's a little bit of review with some GCF type questions, and at the same time, you're learning something called a quadratic trinomial and how to factor that. I've done many videos on that, but it's just, if you're going through algebra, there's no way to avoid it. When you get the rational expressions that you have to reduce, and you're looking at there's so many applications where you're going to have to know this skill. Okay. It's going to set you up for where you're going to go. Math builds on itself. So you must conquer each level to move up. So for example, an example of a quadratic trinomial, we'll look at one. Let's say you had p squared. I'm doing this one because it has negatives, and sometimes that's the challenge for a lot of students. Those minus signs or negative numbers, right? You got p squared minus 2p. I'm going to go back to live stream. I had to write that down. Minus 15. Now, this is not a linear binomial. This is considered a quadratic because the degree is 2. The highest term degree would be this one, and the degree of it is 2. We talked about during the classification section, anytime you have a degree of 2, it's called a quadratic, but there are 3 terms, so we call it a trinomial. It's kind of like, I tell kids it's like a first name and a last name. My first name's Chris, my last name's Morris. So when I say Chris Morris, you really know it's me and not the 10 other Chris's in the room, right? So if you see quadratic trinomial, we really know specifically the type of polynomial we're looking at. Polynomial is like an overview word or a general word, like a human being. Okay, that's great, but there's Chinese human beings, there's Japanese, there's Russian, there's American, there's so many types. If you want to get specific, think about a police officer who just witnessed a robbery, and they got to describe to the person on the call on the what do you call that thing, walkie-talkie, right? Oh yeah, we have a black male who's 6 foot tall, who's running, he looks like he's about 23. They're going to be describing so that we can really narrow down who to find, who's the culprit, right? Or a white female who's in her teens, who looks, you're going to be kind of going through that, right? So when I say quadratic trinomial, that's kind of the heart of it. I'm trying to describe the type of polynomial. Okay, backing up. So as always, you want to ask yourself, does it have a GCF? Does it have a greatest common factor? That's always ding, 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 my one string guitar. I'm not a musician, but I can play that one note, baby. I can play it all day long. Does it have a GCF? 5 p squared. It's got nothing but p's. Negative 2b. This one doesn't have a p. I can't say that there's anything in common to all 3 terms other than 1. You can always say 1's the GCF, but that doesn't do anything. When you divide by 1, it still stays the same. So we usually ignore 1. Okay, but other than 1, there's not really a GCF. So I move on to, what's my next question I should ask myself? And that question is, how many terms does it have? If it has 3 terms like this, check and see if it's a power of 2, because that's what we're going to do next. Now, if you paid attention in class, we talked about when you have quadratic trinomials, you want to ask yourself, what 2 numbers can you think of that multiply? I'm going to put a little m above this. Multiply to the outside number. So in this case, that's a minus 15. Think of that as a negative 15, okay, because of the minus sign. It has to multiply to negative 15, but at the same time, it has to add, and I'll just say the word add. Yeah, it has to add to the middle coefficient, which is negative 2. It has to do those things. Multiply to negative 15, add to negative 2. And you got to think about it. And you might have to test some stuff and go to the drawing board, right? So let's think of two numbers. I'm going to put little blanks here that multiply to negative 15. Now remember, not positive 15, negative 15. That means one number is going to have to be negative, one number is going to have to be positive, because a positive times a negative is a negative. All right. You could try 1 times negative 15. You could try that, and that multiplies the negative 15. But is there any way I can add 1 plus a negative 15 and get a negative 2? I don't think so. That adds to negative 14. So after trying that option out, I have to go back to the drawing board. I'm like, well, even though 1 times negative 15 does check this box, so to speak, it doesn't check the other box. It has to add to negative 2. So then I'm like, well, what about 3 and 5? That multiplies to 15. So you got to make one negative, one positive. I don't know. Maybe I'll make it a negative 3 and a positive 5. Negative 3 times positive 5 equals negative 15, right? But let's check the box. Let's see if it does. What's negative 3 plus 5? Does that equal negative 2? Oh, it almost does. It equals positive 2. Okay, negative 3 plus 5 is a positive 2. We need it to be a negative 2. Watch your signs and slow down. I'm thinking of one student in particular. Slow down because you're going to make a silly mistake that you really know if you don't. Okay. So it's an easy fix, actually. If it's equaling 2, but it needs to be a negative 2, that's a surefire sign that I just need to switch the signs. Make the 5 negative. Okay. Make the 3 positive. A positive times a negative, it'll still equal negative 15. But look, positive 3 plus a negative 5. Now that equals negative 2. Okay, it checks both boxes. And so now I found the winning combination, and that's literally how you have to go about it. Start with the multiplying piece, start with the factors of the outside number, and then see what adds to the inside number. So what we do is we see that p squared there. Well, p squared really means p times p. So we always separate the first term, get rid of the power 2, split it, we call that expanding it, put it into each parentheses. And if you got a positive 3 and a negative 5, then that's how we put it in here. We say positive 3 and minus 5. And that is your factors. Those are your factors, I should say. P plus 3 times p minus 5. Bam, that's it. Okay. Now, all this down here was just my kind of visual to kind of let you see my thinking process. When you get really good at doing these, you don't really have to write them out. You'll find you can just kind of do it in your head. But this is how I factor a quadratic trinomial. Okay. Negatives, you need to slow down. If they're negatives, you do, because you'll tend to, oh, I got this. And then pride goes before the fall, right? And you're like, oh, this is so easy. And then you're going to go so quickly. And I guarantee you, before you know it, you're going to make the wrong number negative, the wrong number positive. You'll do something silly. A lot of times it's a test of your patience here when you get to these types of problems. Okay, so what do? We went over how to do GCF. We went over how to do the trinomial, one example. What do you do when it's like a hybrid, a combination? Chris, what are you talking about? Well, I'll bring up an example right now. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you'll find that there are certain examples where you really are doing both skills in one problem. For example, let's say you have another quadratic trinomial like 2p squared plus 14p plus 24. Okay, this is going to be your next example that I'm going to kind of show you guys, okay, because this is important. A lot of kids think it's the AC method. If you've been with me long enough to learn that one, not always. You got to pluck your one string guitar, folks. You got to check for a GCF. If there is a GCF, it's your responsibility to identify that and to deal with it. So when you look at each one of these terms, do you see anything in common? A factor that goes into 2, a factor that also goes into 14, a factor that also goes into 24. Give it some thought. Hopefully, eventually you'll be like, wait a minute. Yeah, there is a GCF. That GCF would be 2. And you would be right. So 2 is the GCF. 2 goes into 2 and 14 and 24. So once you identify the GCF, you need to do pretty wide parentheses because you're going to have to put 3 terms in there. And you're going to divide each term by the GCF. That's a lot like the first example we did on this video. Okay, 2p squared divided by 2p is just p squared. 14p divided by 2, that's just going to be positive 7p. And then 24 divided by 2 is going to be positive 12. So this is what it's going to look like, okay? This is the GCF component, the GCF portion. Now that I have factored by GCF, some of you guys are going to be tempted to think we're done. but not necessarily. See, your job is to look inside the parenthesis and ask yourself what kind of polynomial is left inside the parenthesis. Well, if you give it some thought, you'll notice there are 3 terms and there's a degree of 2. That's a quadratic trinomial. So we're going to do kind of what you just learned on example 2 now with what's inside the parenthesis. So you got p squared plus 7p plus 12. You need to figure out what multiplies to 12 and adds to 7, right? We got to take it a step further. You got to give it some thought. So what I say is bring down your GCF, but then at this stage, you're going to do 2 parentheses, okay? You're going to do 2 parentheses. You're going to say P and P, right? Because it's P squared. But you got to ask yourself what multiplies to 12 that also adds to 7. And you can go through it visually if you're a visual person. If you can do it in your head and you feel like you're good there, try it, okay? But the factors of 12 vary. You got 1 times 12. That equals 12, right? But 1 plus 12 is equal to 13, not 7. Then you got what? 2 times 6. 2 times 6 is 12. Add those up. What's 2 plus 6? Ah, close. That's 8. We need it to be 7. Oh, no. Is there anything else that's a factor of 12? Oh, wait a minute. What about 3 and 4? Say positive 3 and positive 4. 3 times 4 is also a product. The product is 12. Factors of 12. But if you add 3 and 4, that checks our box because 3 plus 4 is 7. So that's your winning combination. But this bottom row here would be considered the factors. You'd have to include the original GCF because you factor that out too. But then you'd be left with P plus 3 and P plus 4. And this is considered the correct factorization. So you'll notice we did 2 steps here. We did a GCF factoring, and then we divided it out. But then we used our skill for factoring quadratic trinomials, and it happened on the same problem. And yes, this does occur. That's why you have to go through the protocols. If you work as a professional, I keep going back to the doctor example just because that's just a good one for people to relate with. You have a certain set of protocols to go through if a person has been considered dead and there's not much to do. If the person's alive and breathing, you need to go to, I don't know, CPR. I'm not a doctor, but I'm just saying you're going to do different things based on the situation. Same thing when you're going about factoring a polynomial. All right. So there you go. Those are the factoring people. Now, I have some people who are finishing up our program, and at the last, 2-3 weeks or so, we try to mix it up with different kinds of questions that require you to use some thought, some reason, and really just test your problem-solving skills, right? Your problem-solving skills. And so you're going to get a variety of questions. I always say these are kind of more similar to like an ACT style questioning. They're things that you should have been familiar with. You may have started to forget, but if you hang in there, you probably can figure it out, even if you don't remember the direct lesson that you had in class. So there's all kinds of questions I sent you. I just call it my critical thinking package, and it's just going to show lots of examples. There's one in particular I wanted to point out for you because we've done so many of these already. Oh yeah. That's when you're dealing with inequalities. Okay, let me find this one on here. I have it pulled up. But with inequalities, some people are really good at them, and some people it really confuses their mind. Okay, it really messes with their head. So like, here's a problem. I'm gonna just read this to you, and I want you to think about what this means. So it's question 46 from this week's assignment. And the question says, you want to purchase a necklace for $325. Okay. Got a necklace. Imagine it. What color is it? It's so pretty, $325. This is probably a Christmas gift or something. I mean, this isn't cheap to me. You have already saved $115. Man, you really want this necklace. All right. And then you set aside $20 per week. So you're going about, saving a little bit of time, budgeting your money, which inequality could be used to find the number of weeks it will take to save at least. Now, this is where people get confused. At least $325. And so what you'll see is you have 4 options, and I'm going to try to sketch kind of what this looks like. All right. You have 4 different options where it could be one or the other. And you see a lot going on. Like, for example, they say you've already saved $115. So that's your fixed price. There's going to be some that make it look like it's a variable component, but that's something you already have. It hasn't necessarily changed. So that's your constant. You don't need a variable there. And then it says you set aside $20 per week. Well, that's a key giveaway that per, if you were per, for each, for every, something that changes over time, that's almost always a dead giveaway that you need to put your variable there because it varies, right? And then it talks about that total amount of money that it's going to cost for this necklace, $325. The question you got to figure out is, when it said at least, you want at least $325 after all this, is that less than, when you hear the word at least, is that greater than, is it, I'm probably saying that backwards as I put it, right? Is it greater than or equal to? Is it, which inequality is it? Okay. Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Or is it this? Which one could it be? Well, you got to think about the word at least. A lot of people accidentally or mistakenly say or hear the word least and they think, oh, least, that means less, right? What does the word or phrase at least mean? Right? For example, let's say you get an allowance and you want to go to the movies with your friends, and you tell your mom, I really want to. I've been a good girl. I've done all my chores. I need at least $20 so I can go to the movies and get some popcorn or whatever. At least, what you're really saying is, Mom, I will not accept less than $20. Right? I need $20 or more. But when you hear the word least, a lot of kids see the word least, they think, oh, it's less than. No, you don't want less than $20. You want at least $20. So at least is basically saying I want greater than this or the same amount as this. I don't want less than this, at least. And this is why greater than or equal to is the right selection to go here. It messes with a lot of kids. I've seen them miss this on ACT prep courses or just math classes. And I know in our session we didn't get a chance to do many inequalities, but I wanted to throw that in there because of the wordplay, the way they play with the words. It can kind of be confusing, but think about how people say that in everyday language, right? At least doesn't really mean less than. It means I want at least this much or more. And even like marketing commercials, they'll play on those kinds of words all the time. I've fallen for it. I fall for it like hook, line, and sinker every time, I feel like. And the phrase that they use in marketing is they'll say, we have a special discount starting at 50% off. They're sneaky there. Starting at 50% off. That means there's maybe one item that's 50% off, and most of them are less than that. It starts here, but we have a discount all weekend. And so your brain, he sees the 50% off, thinks everything's 50% off. They're playing with the words there. It's a little tip just for life. I fall for it. So on that, I guess I'm a hypocrite. Anyway, so moving on to my personal finance course, my People Taking My Money Made Simple program. We're talking about the nitty gritty this week. We're getting into the world of investments, mutual funds, stocks. What's the difference between saving and investing? And so I don't want to cover too much on here because I want you to take the course and get the nitty gritty, right? But just to kind of overview some key concepts we were hitting, and which was basically, what's the difference of saving versus investing? What's the difference between saving money versus investing money? Yes, there's some crossover. There's some overlap, right? Both situations are good because they're saying don't spend every dollar that comes your way. Okay, that's what happens in either one of those categories, saving versus investing, right? Well, they're both healthy things and wise things that you're going to want to do in life, especially as you mature into your late 20s and move into adulthood in a further way. But there's some differences. Like, for example, saving is more of a short-term thing. It's a short-term objective. I'll say it that way. The process, it's usually just putting a cold, hard cash aside in a savings account or even a checking account, just something that you don't touch, right? And it's for short-term availability. You want to go to that in a fix. If you're a homeowner, for example, I'm dealing with this stuff all the time. There's always something that, got to get this fixed. Oh, we didn't know we had to spend this much money. It's nice to have that $1,000 emergency fund, like we talked about in class, that you can use for, just repairs that happen. Every year, if you're a homeowner, you can attest, you probably got like 4 things that something broke that you got to get repaired, or plumbing or something like that. And so you want to save for those reasons. You're not really that worried about gaining interest on your money or trying to get your money to make you money with savings. And so examples would be like cash or money market accounts even. But anyway, that's kind of the point. The average return on savings accounts is extremely low. You're talking about like 0 to 2% interest. That's not much money. I mean, I don't know what that comes out to. I'm not sitting down and doing that, but I mean, let's say you put $500 in the savings account, yippee. And at the end of the year, you made 500, you have $510. So you made like $10. That's probably on the high end. I don't even know, but I'm just giving you an example That's not investing, but it's still wise. You need to have both, right? Investing, the objective is totally different. It's more of a long-term goal, right? So you got your short-term goals, you got your long-term goal. Investing is putting money to work for you over the long term. And you do that by buying assets, buying and holding assets that grow. And you want compound interest. And we're going to talk about what compound interest is, or the effects of it during our sessions this week, if you haven't had yours yet. But the assets for investing look different than saving, which is mostly just cash. Assets would be like stocks. That's just owning part of a company. Bonds, which is kind of like a loan that the government takes from you and pays you back. It's kind of interesting. We'll talk about that. Mutual funds, which kind of overlaps with stocks. Index funds, property, for example, homes and land. That's an asset. That's an investment. And there's some risk involved. There's way more risk involved with investing than with savings. Savings is next to no risk. I mean, nothing's no risk, but it's pretty low. Investing comes with some risk, but if you shoot for the long term, like 30 years from now, generally the risks and the benefits outweigh the risk, and you have a pretty rough percentage, like anywhere between like 7% growth, 6% growth, 5.5 to 10%, ranging in that range. You've been able to take that to the bank over the past, half a century or so, right? So this is kind of what we were talking about and introducing and trying to help you kind of categorize what's an example of investing versus what's an example of saving. And then we talk about some specific things like retirement accounts, an IRA versus a Roth IRA versus a 401k, and just some key takeaways that you want to know the benefits of, especially when it comes to taxes. I mean, at teenage years, you probably don't even hardly know what a tax is because they haven't had enough experience. And so we're going to unpack that. But anyway, I'm not saying too much more on that because you need to take the course and sign your kid up for it. It's going to help them save thousands of dollars over the course of their life if they can get some of this stuff that's not being taught in our schools taught to them now, why they're really, malleable and willing to learn, and we can get ahead of the curve a little bit, if that makes sense. All right. So that's pretty much all I have to say on today's Q&A. I hope this was of value to you. If you didn't get a chance to watch it live, I know I had, some people pop in and out. You can always go back and watch the replay. So that's really cool, and watch it at a convenient time for you. I know 9:45 a.m. or 10 a.m. is not always possible if you got school schedules, college courses, or you maybe have a part-time job or something. But you can go back and watch the replay. We covered factoring by GCF, factoring quadratic trinomials, doing a hybrid of that where you're doing GCF and factoring of polynomials. We looked at a little inequality word problem example. We talked about some personal finance and some good stuff. And anyway, you just kind of fast forward through the video at the content that you need. And anyway, as always, like, subscribe, share, click that notification bell for more content for teaching mathematics. If you want to go ahead and subscribe to this YouTube channel, that'd be great, and click the bell. You'll be notified anytime we go live or upload a video that is public. And if you want to sign your child up for some tutoring or some math support, go ahead to my website. It's morrismodel.com. It's in the description, but I might as well just type it in here, right? morrismodel.com, and you'll find ways to book me, have a conversation about maybe our 10-week courses or tutoring online, and we'll try to help you any way we can, adapt to your kids' needs and speak to them in a way that they receive and understand, not the way that we're used to talking adults, right? But how your kid receives information. That's what we strive to do. So anyway, love you guys. I'll catch you on the next one. Have a blessed week.